director of the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, who has had a major role in seeding contemplative practices in college and university courses throughout North America. So to give us all a sense of perspective on where contemplative studies really got going, I've asked Mirabai to come and talk, so thank you, Mirabai.
Thanks, Al. This is great. I come to you today not as an acting academic. Actually, my action in the last while has I just put to bed a book on dying, on loving and dying. So there's a different energy here today where everybody's very much alive, I hope. For about 5 years, until last year, I was teaching in a course with Carolyn Jacobs, who's here somewhere, who was at the time the dean of the Smith School of Social Work. And we taught a really amazing course called Clinical Practice and Contemplative Practice, which we loved until she retired. And now I teach an intensive 3-day orientation for incoming students at Amherst College. And the interesting thing to me is that out of 400 incoming students, 70 out of those 400 for the last several years have chosen from a number of things they can do for those 3 days. And 70 out of 400 choose meditation and yoga. So I just finished doing that, and they're intense. There are 400 chosen out of 8,000, and then those are the 8,000, as you know, who were willing to apply to Amherst. They're so tense when they get there. You all know this. It was stunning to me. So I called this in the monastery to the classroom, a contemplative higher education in the West. And the reason I did that is a couple of years ago, some years ago, in 2007, I developed a course with Norman Fisher and Danny Goleman for Google. It was called, because they're the big search engine, they called it Search Inside Yourself, contemplative course. And it was the first course in mindfulness-based emotional intelligence. And and it's been the most, I don't know what the word is, subscribed, taken, used course at Google of anything that's ever been offered there. It's amazing. But so some years later, a few years ago, they asked me to come and give a talk to the young people being trained. So I did, and I asked them what they wanted to know, and they said, this is a great question. How did we get here? So I decided to give them some roots, which I'm about to do now. And part of what I showed them was the teachers that many of us studied with in Asia, from the different traditions in Asia, and then how things got translated when we came here. And after it, there were about 20 Asian students in the room, not Asian American, but they had come from Thailand and Malaysia, Singapore, Japan. And they said, wow, we never knew. We never knew these practices came from Asia. These were educated, smart people. They said, we came all the way here to learn this course in mindfulness. We thought it was American. So ever since then, I am emphasizing the roots of contemplative practice in the West. So, as we know, what we're doing is not new, but it is a new version that in the original educational institutions in the West, there were many contemplative practices. including illuminated books, which I think may have a comeback now. We get tired of reading everything on our phones. Let's see, I'm sorry, I'm just still trying to figure this out. Okay. There. So, yeah, so origins. That was the word that Hal asked me to do, origins. I'm not going to do a whole medieval thing, although that's what I studied at Georgetown. But there was the monastic tradition, and then after that, I'm sure you all know this history, came the Reformation. And the Reformation put a lot of emphasis on not on the mystic, repressed the mystic, and religion became related to being productive, and also related to having some member or the religion itself in between you and God. Direct experience of the divine was discouraged. I'm going to go back here. So then, all you academics know, but it's important to remember that how Descartes, in saying that I think, therefore I am, the implication of that is that there are not other ways to discover who we are. We had to do it through thinking. And then I always put the Enlightenment in quotes because we use it in a different sense now, but the Enlightenment, or the age of reason in scientific study and critical thinking, in giving us the immense gifts that came from that time and continue, also devalued what we learned through direct experience, or first-person learning, as Hal calls it. And out of that came what we struggle against, the compartmentalization and fragmentation. So, again, William James, and I was going to put Dewey up there also, and I didn't, but I do want to say to you that it is important as part of the history, and that there's a great work on Dewey was done by Stephen Rockefeller, and who's very interested in the connection, has written a lot about the connection between democracy and spirituality. And he did a great piece in which he said, we needed the Statue of Liberty to stand up, and we do, and we also needed the Buddha to sit down. It's a really good piece, you should look at it. So those are roots, and William James. Now, I'm going to skip way forward to the 1970s, where we have, instead of William James, we have William James Hall, in which William James is rarely ever mentioned. He was out of favor by the time the building got up. And with that, at this time at Harvard, this is David McClellan, who was the head of social psychology that was housed inside William James Hall. And this other person is Ram Dass. David was the head of social psychology when Ram Dass and Tim Leary began exploring consciousness and were fired. I'm sure you mostly know those stories. I recently went through a lot of the press from that time. It was kind of amazing. I mean, you know, from being in the academy, it's a rare time when the university is on the front pages of everything. So somebody, I think Ram Dass's mother or someone, had saved all this stuff, and I was like going through it. Amazing. It was like huge, huge news. They were the first fired from Harvard, and it was for exploring psychedelics with students. They crossed a line. They were allowed to do it with graduate students, interestingly, but there was one undergraduate student who slipped in. As you know, psychedelic research is back in the academy again, especially at NYU and Hopkins, where they're looking at their value for post-traumatic stress, for a peaceful dying, for addiction, and so on. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got to starting the Center for Contemplative Mind. There we go. I keep forgetting, doing the wrong thing. Okay. In 1967, that's me, I was teaching freshman English at SUNY Buffalo. SUNY Buffalo decided at that time that they wanted to be the best university system. Has anybody been part of that system? They wanted to be the best university system in the country, and so they were competing with California, of course. And they hired away Martin Meyerson, who'd been president of Berkeley during the free speech movement. And they started building it up department by department. And think about it now, I think it's so funny, because now, if you were going to start with your highest profile department, what would it be? It might be neuroscience, it might be any number of things. Then it was English. So they spent a lot of money, and they hired great people. My committee, for those of you who know that world, my committee was John Barth, Leslie Fiedler, and Bob Creeley, real kind of giants of American literature at that time. And I was also, this was right after Martin Luther King had been killed, and the State University of New York decided that the universities should represent the diversity of the New York population, which they didn't by any means, and they should do it immediately. So that meant that the freshman class that year was, 75%. In the minorities in New York then were African American and Native American. So, and they didn't have enough money to pay for them to live in dorms. So they had to recruit in Buffalo. And the Buffalo schools were, you can imagine, terrible. And the students they not only hadn't been well educated, but they had not been prepared to go to college. They did not think, most of them never thought they would go to school. So they were recruited off the street practically. And they came to Buffalo. And needless to say, there had to be a program for helping them succeed. And nobody knew what to do. And I had the two African-American students in the former year in my English class, so I was considered an authority. And I helped develop this program. Things were so different in some ways then that I was the faculty advisor for the Black Student Union. Guess why? There were no faculty. The only Black faculty person then was Archie Shepp, musician, and we shared an office to try to develop this program. But it took me out of traditional teaching methods. You can just guess from the feeling in this classroom. It was great. But so we did things like, instead of starting with grammar, sentence construction, essay construction, we'd start with things like writing here and now, freeing them up to just write whatever they were experiencing here and now, giving that validity. One time I was teaching a course in film, and this was, so I'm going to go on to say, during the Vietnam War. And recently I've been saying, many of you don't remember how intense an experience that was on campus and off, but it was. And although now I think many people are starting to watch this new series on PBS and it's bringing it back. But so one night I showed the film The Battle of Algiers. You see. So showing that in the context of the Vietnam War was really intense. And after it, so we'd watch the film, then we'd go into a seminar room and we'd talk about it, you know. It was so emotional. After it, we went in and we sat there, and I couldn't bring myself to start speaking. There's too much emotion. I didn't know where to start. So I just thought, well, I just sit for a while, just be quiet. I had never meditated in my life at this point. I just sit for a while, and students will start asking questions or saying things. So I just sat in silence, and then the students sat in silence, and we just kept sitting in silence for about, whatever it was, 45 minutes. And then at the end, we just got up and left. And later, many students said, that was the most powerful class I ever attended. I wasn't sure if that meant that my teaching wasn't all that great in the other classes, but it was very powerful. But I got this glimpse between those two things and others of that there would be other ways to reach what's important in students. So that's Buffalo. The police ended up taking over the campus. It was so intense. The FBI was everywhere. It was impossible to teach or to learn. So I decided to take some time off, and I had a grant to write, and I thought I would go to London or Paris. My committee suggested I leave the country because I was so involved in all of this. So I decided I would travel and try to make sense, try to find a way of being and living and knowing that made sense in the context of everything I was coming to see and know. I was so confused. This bring in a little more context. It's Richard Bradigan, who those of you who know from that time, he was my boyfriend. But also, he is a kind of icon of that time in that he was a great writer and he committed suicide. So I didn't want to do that. I looked at the only inspiration I could find at the time. I had grown up a Catholic girl, and my first marriage was to a Presbyterian, which meant that I got excommunicated. So I'd been in preschool through Georgetown Graduate School, and I got excommunicated for marrying a Presbyterian. So I was desperately looking for some nurturing, something to make sense. Thomas Merton was writing about Asia. So I went overland from Europe through, this is 1970. You could go overland through Europe, through the former Yugoslavia, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and into India. And we stayed with people all along the way and went to mosques and churches, and people fed us and took care of us. And it was totally peaceful then, totally peaceful. Of course, there were a number of dictators along the way keeping it peaceful, but it was another time. I got to India, and the first day I was there, I met Sharon Salzberg on the street. We had been at the same school, but we didn't know each other. And she told me that there was a meditation course for Westerners being offered. And first time a Buddhist course had ever been offered for Westerners, that's what we were called. So I thought, why not? I mean, I didn't really know. I kind of knew what I was looking for, but I had no idea how I was going to find it. And I thought a little bit like wine and cheese in Paris, meditation in India, try it. So I did. And this is a group of people I met there and then traveled with later. Some of them you'll maybe recognize. Can you see is the pointer on there? Yes. Yeah, that's Danny Goleman. And those of you who do yoga, that's Krishna Das, Ram Das. So the teacher for the course was Goenka, and he taught Vipassana in these 10-day courses, and none of us had ever done anything like that before, and we just sat from 5 in the morning till 10 at night in silence. And it was so powerful, especially coming out of what we had come out of, all this intensity of the West and all this travel together, and then there was so much going on inside, and then we just sat. And then slowly things fell away, and then we began to look more closely at what was happening. And it was, for me, as a literature student, it was like so revealing that you could learn anything by looking inside. I had read hundreds and hundreds of books. I was always looking for the thing outside. And to find it inside was, it just changed my life. We did this first 10-day course, and we all loved it. I mean, it's hard, but we loved it. And then we did another one and another one. I think we did 5 in a row, one underneath the Bodhi tree. You could do that then, outdoors. By the time we left there, in that last picture, we were in a zone, And, but I realized that not only looking within was another way of knowing, but trusting what you know. We were not allowed to read anything, to write anything during this whole time. We were only to look inside. We had 2 meals a day. That was it. We didn't do yoga. We didn't do anything. We just looked. And I realized when it was over, I knew some things. And I totally trusted that I knew them. It was such a different kind of knowing. I didn't need any notes. I didn't need anything. I didn't know everything, but I knew some things that gave me a kind of radical self-confidence, that I was actually walking around on the planet, that I belonged here, and then I knew, and then I could get in touch with what really mattered to me when new things arose. It was amazing. I also felt like I had these great teachers in graduate school, but they were mostly teachers with great ideas and great creativity often, but most of their lives were a mess, and they couldn't really talk about, anything other than their discipline. And before Buffalo, I went to Penn for a while to study philosophy to try to sort all this out. That was really a mistake. But so I began to see that a teacher could be something different from what we knew in the West, and that all these teachers weren't perfect, but they were embodying what it was we were learning, and that by being with them, you got a glimpse of what it could be if you really were able to fully embody it yourself. I went to India thinking for 2 weeks. I stayed for 2 years. My next teacher was this great Indian saint, Neem Karoli Baba. And he taught by hardly any words at all. And he really taught vibrationally. I mean, I spent a long time with him, and I changed so much from being with him. I learned so much about myself, but he would say things like, love everyone. I had never heard that in graduate school. And serve everyone. It was amazing. And again, he was the embodiment of what it was I wanted to know and be. And we were all, and then when we came back, we were all struggling with these like profoundly different understandings of how to be in the world that we had discovered. And here's another one. This is, you may recognize Sharon Salzberg Joseph and Jack Cornfield with some of their teachers, trying to understand how to translate the wisdom of the East in the way that we had received it into ways that would make sense in the West. So back to Cambridge in the 70s, a whole lot of us, David McClellan and his wife Mary, who was a painter, they had a lot of kids who had grown up. They were Quakers. They had started Cambridge Friends School. And David, by this time, had gone to Mexico and done some, I forget, psilocybin, I think, and had spent a lot of time with Ram Dass and Tim and had opened up to new consciousness. And so he invited a group of us to live there. And most were his students, and Danny Goleman was his student, and Cliff Sarin, who is at UC Davis, who's done the research on the Shamatha Project. He was there. Richie Davidson was his student. Richie's at Wisconsin now doing a lot of fMRI studies on meditation. He wasn't living in the house, but he was there a lot. John Kabat-Zinn lived nearby, and he was a student of Sun Sanim, who was here in Providence, but he would come and stay with us a lot. Mark Epstein lived there. He's one of the first people to integrate these practices into psychotherapy. He's written a great book called Thoughts Without a Thinker. And then David was a consummate academic. So every night he'd come home from Harvard. He was starting to look into these things. And Harvard was bringing some yogis from different places and wiring them up. And David would come home and he'd say, it was just like a seminar table. They had this long mahogany table with like mismatched chairs, and we'd cook up a dinner every night. And David would say something like, I've been thinking, I was wondering if there could be any connection between meditation and flu resistance. So what about the immune system? Do you think it's affected by these things? And then this whole conversation would happen with everybody around the table, and everybody had different ideas on it. And then there will also be, other than us young students, there'd be visiting people. Of course, there were always interesting people visiting Harvard, so to add to the conversation, Octavio Paz, who was the great Mexican poet, had at one point been the ambassador to India. And so he was really interested in all these things, and he would come, and Harvey Cox, the Secular City, and then teachers would come. Sun Sanim, Kala Rinpoche, and others. There's Richie, looking young. And this is what like teaching looked like in the 70s. This is Mark Epstein over here. And then among the many teachers who came was Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And many of us had gone to listen to his teachings in Vermont, which was then called Tail of the Tiger. And we loved him. And so he would stay at our house. Here he's doing a blessing ceremony for my 2-year-old son. Then he, of course, in 1974, started Naropa Institute, now Naropa University. And he asked Ram Dass to give some lectures there, because at this point, Ram Dass had written Be Here Now. and it was kind of the Bible of this period, and everybody, 2 million copies were sold, and everybody was reading it, and so he attracted a lot of people, and he wanted Naropa to thrive, so he came knowing. Naropa originally thought there were going to be 175 people coming, and 2,000, I think, showed up. And so Ram Dass and Chogyam Trungpa taught on alternate nights, and Trungpa was teaching like introduction to Buddhism, basically, and Ram Dass taught the Bhagavad Gita. And I said, it's the only time in this country where 1,000 people signed up for a course in the Bhagavad Gita. And when we got there, thinking there'd only be a few, Ram Dass was going to do it by himself, and then he decided he needed teaching assistants. And this, I tell you, because it's also a reflection of other things that were going on there that summer. Ram Dass he had 13 teaching assistants, 12 men, and me. Yeah. There was a lot of feminist agitation going on that summer. But it was an extraordinary time. And the first time really formally where we brought together the idea of higher education, of formal learning, and these many strains of the contemplative that we'd been discovering. It was such an amazing time. Here are some of the people who were there. And then it grew. And I'm just giving you these few because you're going to have a talk on Naropa later. But it is such a statement to the power of contemplative education. It started in this very funky way and has now grown into an extraordinary university. Then, so now I'm trying to do this as history. 1995. We put, with two friends who also happened to be heads of foundations, they had just funded the Bill Moyer series called Healing in the Mind. And that explored the ways in which what was then called alternative practices, alternative healing modalities, how Americans were participating in these. And but when they did that, so these two friends, as foundation heads, had funded that. But as Bill Morris discovered in interviewing all these folks, that many of them were using what we now call contemplative practices. And so we, the three of us and some others, decided we wanted to ask the question. I mean, I felt like I already knew the answer, but we had to ask the question, could these practices be beneficial in other sectors of American life? And so we brought together a working group, and I just named some of the people here who you might forget, that Francisco Varela was there from the beginning, and many other extraordinary people. And we had these conversations. We had them for a couple of years about whether this could be true. And it's interesting in terms of like getting people together. We were such great people, and we had such a good time when we were together. But there came a point where, and everybody loved these conversations. And then there was one that like everyone was kind of like restless and kind of wished they hadn't come for so long and what was going on. The question had been answered, and we were still asking it, but we really all knew it was time to stop asking the question. And we formed, so that was all from 95 as a working group, and then in 97 we incorporated into the center. So also, I would say in terms of how it all happened, and I'm not going to go through much of the science because many other people are here, but I just want to say that, like, in the early 70s, the very first papers started appearing. But by 2016, there were over 1,000 publications in English last year on research, on contemplative practices, scientific research. That really made a difference in terms of us being able to introduce it into the university as you're saying, talking to provosts and presidents and all of that, the research made a big difference, and also into other sectors. We were also working in law and in business and in journalism and with the environmental community. The science really made a difference. And so I'm just going to mention a couple here that in the beginning really made a difference. Richie's work at Wisconsin. I remember that he found in one of these studies that you were better able to hold conflicting ideas in the mind at the same time. Academics loved that. And just as we all know and take for granted now, but just being able to say that this can be cultivated, it can be learned, it can be taught, and you too and your students could benefit from these practices. And then, of course, behind it all was the acceptance of neuroplasticity, which I know that scientists knew about for years, but finally they were admitted to. And that was huge. Sometimes that was all you needed to present. And this was always my favorite, that when Harvard found that meditation increased the size of the brain, that was like, oh my God, I was surprised they didn't turn themselves entirely into a monastery. But so when we founded the center, this was our mission, to integrate contemplative awareness into contemporary life in order to create a more just, compassionate, and reflective society. And we did a lot of studies in the beginning. We interviewed 80 people who had integrated practices of different kinds into different kinds of organizations. And we published a lot about, we did focus groups on the word contemplative, like you were saying about what word to use. We were afraid to use meditation in the beginning. That was wild. We couldn't possibly use that. They'd either think we were Asian or we were hippies, God forbid. So we did focus groups on the word contemplative, and it turned out, and they were like with kind of ordinary American people. It turned out that ordinary American people thought that contemplative or contemplate meant what you do when you were thinking about buying a new car. That was the most common thing. We decided, well, either you choose a word that already, has good connotations, the right connotations in the culture, or you use a word and you teach the culture to use it in a different way. We went that route. And we made the statement that inner transformation, was important to changing the world. That, of course, was a radical statement and still under challenge, but because we were not a university, we were a nonprofit. We were committed to social change. And part of our strategy in higher education was to, we did a lot of research on what we called the hidden history, but we wanted to show the ways in which contemplative practices had existed in all the spiritual religious traditions throughout time and throughout the world. And for a lot of people, that was radical. A lot of people thought it was just Buddhist, and to find those hidden in Christianity and Judaism and in Islam was a lot of scholarly work and I think important work. And then talking about contemplative epistemology, and I would say that Arthur Zions was the most, he was the most articulate voice on this, but what we really wanted to assure universities was that we weren't trying to replace critical thinking or the scientific method. We were wanted to teach as well another way of knowing, another way of teaching, learning, and knowing that would complement it, and that students would graduate with a fuller appreciation for knowing. And then, we looked at teaching, learning, and researching all from a contemplative lens. And we struggled between the nature of the contemplative, appreciating impermanence, experimentation, being radical, and being more established. And we tried to integrate both into various programs that we did, and with more or less success in different ways. We formed the tree of contemplative practices from it was grounded research, from talking to 40 teachers of contemplative practice from across all the traditions, and then 80 people who've been integrating it into different organizations. And then we sorted it all out, and we made this tree, and it's been used thousands of times. We have a blank tree on the website where people, in teaching, put whatever practices they're trying to highlight. And then our first project, and this is the only picture of fellows I could find, looking exhausted sitting around a table. But and Hal put it up. We partnered, so we did the traditional route in the sense that we chose to do fellowships. Those were well known. We chose to give away money. That was attractive. And we partnered with the American Council of Learned Societies, so that gave us legitimacy. However, when we first offered, we did not think that none of us who sat around and thought that this would be a good way to affect higher education, none of us knew anybody who we thought would apply. We thought, oh, there must be people out there. We called them the hidden meditators. Of course there are people out there. None of us knew anybody. So then we said, well, we'll just do it. So we put it out, and then we thought, well, we're attaching money to it, so we'll get some response. But first year I think we gave 10 fellowships, and we got 135 applications that year. And we were afraid that they were going to be very flaky, basically. They were amazing. They were creative. They were rigorous. They were from great scholars at good schools. It was really amazing, and it went from there. And in every discipline, in every different kind of school, so over, I guess, 10 years or more, we gave 158 fellows in 100 schools, all different kinds. The fellowships were to develop a course that integrated contemplative practice into your teaching. And and then we worked to support and broaden that network. We had meetings where we brought fellows together. We had regional meetings. We started having national conferences at Amherst and Columbia, Howard. We had regional meetings where people would just informally get together and share what they were doing. We had disciplinary meetings where people just of certain disciplines would come together. Disciplinary meetings always sounded to me like you had to go to the principal's office. Okay, and then we did the usual things. We had a website and a blog and newsletters, and then presentations at professional schools. Those all was like the fertilizer that led it to be much easier to be able to do it now. And we got into a bunch of publications, and then people started publishing books. We formed the National Association for Contemplative Mind in Higher Education. at the end, I'll show you our latest conference, which is coming up. And so then I'm just going to quickly go through the various practices, and it's all kind of, we did this, Dan Barbizet, who teaches economics at Amherst, and I did this book where we really basically put together everything that we learned from what all these fellows were doing. And we partly broke it down by practice. So mindfulness, other forms of meditation, used, you can see, across disciplines. Walking. CUNY Law School built a labyrinth. This was the great Marilyn Nelson, she was the poet laureate of Connecticut at the time. I loved this. She wanted to teach cadets, because she was criticized for teaching it at West Point, teach cadets the gifts of interiorization and humanization, that learning to confront their vulnerabilities and weaknesses through trying to meditate will teach them compassion, to teach them to see beyond surface appearance, to recognize what real strength is. These are actually my students at Amherst in this picture, but many people, and I love this one. Cressida Hayes, as an example of how she would use it. She was teaching women's studies, I think, but she had her students do a warrior pose, and then she had them, like this, and then she'd keep them in it for a while, and then she'd have them sense how they were moving, their bodies were naturally like moving forward instead of being centered in the moment. And then she went from there to how we lead our lives. That was great. I've been teaching a practice in compassion called Just Like Me. It's wherein you not only focus on the differences in all of us, and these can be really helpful in terms of classes on discovering identity, not only your differences, but it helps you remember without the ways in which we also, in the midst of all of this, share so much as humans. Listening. Contemplative reading. I just put this is not a college student. This is my 7-year-old granddaughter. I try to get her in everything I do, but it's not a great picture. I'm reading law. Although we thought of the law program as separate, a lot of work has been done in law schools, and some really interesting writing has come out of it around. Joseph Goldstein, we did a series for 3 years of retreats for Yale law students, and Joseph Goldstein was the main teacher, and he, at one point, did a talk on the Dharma and the law and the law. It's great. And Native American practices, the arts, and Hal talked about this. Someone called it Zenning the campus, but how hard it was. At Yale Law School, actually, they all had their own zafus, right? So, but how hard it was. And Yale, I mean, it looks like a monastery there, or at least a cathedral. But they could find no place on that whole campus where they could sit and meditate together after they did these retreats. But I said, so one of their professors said they could sit in his office, and I said, only at Yale where the professor's office is so big that a whole class could sit on zafus on the floor. As I said, we give many conferences and brought in people who helped us create legitimacy for this work. And Diana Chapman Walsh was a real ally in that. and Arthur was first the head of our academic program, then he became director of the center, and then he became director of Mind and Life. And now he's retired. And we just started a 10-year lecture series on contemplative education in his name. And we had the first lecture at Smith last year. And if any of you, I'll leave something out. If you want to sign up, I'll invite you to the subsequent lectures. He's really happy about it. And then just, you know about all these things, but what happened as we were doing this? It all began building. So there was this conference. It was such a risk-taking for David Scott to give this conference at UMass. He did two. It started in 1999. And then we had this meeting with Howard Gardner, and who had said there is no spiritual intelligence. And it wasn't a meeting. It was the first was a retreat. It was a 3-day retreat. And Mike Csikszentmihalyi, who Hal mentioned, and then we had other meetings with them. And so trying to integrate what we were discovering and promoting into existing overlapping systems within the university. First contemplative degree was at UMichigan, Ed Sareth, in jazz, where he talked about in improvisational jazz how you have to listen for the silence between the notes. You just don't enter when you feel like it. So he taught his students to listen for the silence between notes, as well as many other things. We had our first national conference in 2003 at Amherst. Then Columbia gave a conference and put out a special issue of Teachers College Bulletin, all in contemplative education. And UVA started the Contemplative Sciences Center. Then the Mind and Life conferences really began to influence the academy, and Investigating the Mind, which was in Cambridge, drew a lot of people, and because it was investigating the mind, it was widely, the information from it was widely shared in the academy. And then came Brown University Contemplative Studies Initiative. There they are. And then in 2007, there was a conference in San Francisco called Uncovering the Heart of Higher Education. And 600 people were there. So that was like another kind of breakthrough. And these are just the early things, and I just selected some so you would get an idea. The work that Carolyn started at Smith's Social Work, which was radical because anything religious or spiritual was kept out of social work as much as it was kept out of religion departments, I guess because of fear of proselytization. But anyhow, it was really important and returned. So Tibet at Emory and C-Care at Stanford developed a compassion curriculum, and Mind and Life educating for the 21st century. And then the Summer Research Institute started, and then this is what Hal asked me to tell you. And I wish I could tell you more. But so we were started with funding from Nathan Cummings and Fetzer and some from Rockefeller. Then over time, of course, it wasn't enough. And we received some funding from individuals. It still wasn't enough. So I was looking, as an entrepreneur, I was looking for other ways to bring money in. I don't know if any of this is relevant to any of your work, but what we did was we tried to do some things that were within what we were doing anyhow and charge money for it. We did a few. But around the foundations, I would say that although we we found those, like we'd find hidden people in different foundations, who already had a practice. But it's such a different time now, and contemplative education is so well established now, and the research is so convincing that I really, and you all probably know this a lot better than I do, that the other major foundations that are interested in education and social change, I would think, are naturals now. We also charge membership in our association, and we charge fees they never really pay for themselves, but we continue to charge fees, hoping that someday they will. So, there's no magic. In all the years of Contemplative Mind, when it was until 2007 when I retired, we raised $1 million a year and spent $1 million a year. And at that time, to raise $1 million a year for meditation for people like lawyers and academics took some convincing. But so, I just say that to say, whatever this is going to be corny, but whatever it is you really want to do, you can figure out a way to do it. You can figure out the financing for it. And just want to say, these are the things that are emerging from everyone we hear from, looking at ways in which contemplative practices can have a beneficial influence on all these factors that are, changing higher education at this time. And what we are working on now, most focused on, are what are being called culturally relevant or responsive practices. In the beginning, a lot of people just had people be silent for 5 minutes at the beginning of their class and maybe again at the end, or they introduced practices, even yoga practices, kind of just the way they had learned them from their teachers. But clearly, effective teaching requires, I didn't even talk about integrating into the nature of the subject that you're teaching, but a lot of people teaching lots of different kinds of students are looking for ways to reach them. And so this Color Insight is Rhonda McGee's work that she's done largely at San Francisco Law School, but it is relevant to others as well. This is Michelle Chapman at Howard. She was teaching. The other thing we really encourage people is, number one, the most important thing is to deepen your own practice. Out of that, you will know what to do. And so a lot of people don't have practices that easily speak to them. Oh, I'm sitting in silent meditation. I could get my students to do that. So Michelle Chapman is a Yoruba practitioner. And in Yoruba, the ancestors are really important. Well, she knew that she couldn't take ancestor worship into her class at University of District of Columbia. But most of her students are African American. She wanted to share with them the essence of her practice that she has learned the most from and that sustains her. And she teaches anthropology. So she did a great thing in that she thought, how does all this fit together? And she had her students make a family tree. And and then put on the family tree everybody they knew about. And then of those people, those whom they could reach, she had them interview those people. And then when they did that, bring that back into the class. They both learned a lot about their own identities and their family identities. And then they shared them with each other, and they had a lot came out that helped them understand both same and different with many other students. And they all, or many, told her that they just felt more, more present, more here, because they had they now felt like kind of roots and branches that they had not before. So that was a good one. And one more. This is, you can read that. This is Kakali Bhattacharya. She teaches, wait a minute, qualitative evaluation. And she has, I can't read it on here, but I don't know if you can read it. She's not up there. But she really emphasizes the importance of knowing yourself and everything about yourself, and the need for practice in order to discover that, in order to qualitatively understand who it is who you are working with and what it is that they're doing. And she's brilliant. So we're really looking at many different ways that will work for many different kinds of students. And we are having a conference in October. I brought brochures here, and you will recognize Judith Zimmer Brown. This is Rhonda McGee, who I mentioned before, and all like amazing people presenting at this. And it's in California near Santa Cruz. So all the information's on there if this interests you. And that's everything I know. Oh, good. Should I stop? Or do you? Okay, good. Does anybody have a question? Yes, Anne.
Mostly appreciation. It's so wonderful to hear your stories. I was around the edges of some of those events, and it's just very, very enriching. I guess this is some of our roots and branches, as you were describing. It's really very moving. And I'd love to hear more. I have a very minor question, which is the name of Michelle, who teaches anthropology, who you mentioned.
Chapman, C-H-A-T-M-A-N.
Chatman.
Yeah.
Where is she?
University of District of Columbia.
Okay.
It's fabulous.
Cool.
She's on our board.
Great. I want to talk to you more about
Yeah.
that, but not here. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for such a rich presentation. I couldn't begin. I hope the PowerPoint might be available to fill in some of the details. You spoke along the way about a program at UC Davis that was movement and dance and contemplative. Can you say a little bit more about the origins of that and the way in which you interacted with the program?
What about UC Davis?
UC Davis?
Yeah.
Yep.
About
the program in movement and dance. That,
oh yeah, that was a fellow who integrated practice into movement and dance. I think there's more about that. I don't remember so much about it in the book. Or if you're really interested, just send me an email and I'll go back into her report and send it to you.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. The book with Daniel.
Yeah, there's some in that book. But if you're really interested,
Yeah.
you can. I can go find her report from when she did that course and send it to you.
And is that current? Is that still going on? That you
I
know
don't
of? Okay. Question for them.
Probably.
Thank you.
Probably. We did an evaluation after all the fellows and found that many, not everybody, but many people not just continued to teach them, but they changed over time. I mean, look at House, But many people just kept changing and changing. It's in the nature of the contemplative that, that it would. And some of the changes, I think, became really interesting. Yeah. Dan did was teaching his course on Introduction to Economics at Amherst, and his students were bored, and he felt that, at a time when he felt like his students really needed to understand the humanity of economics in this country. He had them do a series of practice, but what he realized in his own practice was the heart of every economic decision was desire. It was a moment for me, because I thought, economics, I don't want to know about it, And I thought, desire? I know a lot about that. So, he did things like walk his students through the mall, and he taught them to notice the sensations in their body, and so they would see something they like, want, and they'd notice the sensations in their body, and then they'd keep on walking, and then they'd notice the sensations fall and pass away, And then you did that classic economics thing where you're given like $10 and then you're asked who you would share it with. And he did that, and then he did a compassion practice. And then he asked them again who they would share it with. And of course, the sharing went much broader than the first time around, so, yeah.
Is it on? I'd like to, while people are getting up and stretching and we're setting up for Louis Kamiathi from University of San Diego's talk, I'd like to ask the mentors who've come here and our mentors from Brown who will be speaking during the conference, first to stand up, and then the participants also. So please stand up and identify yourselves and where you're from, and Brown faculty, what courses that you're associated with. So maybe start with just who you are and where you came from.
I'm Judith.
My name is Ann Klein, Rice University in Houston, and also a founder of Dawn Mountain Tibetan Temple, also in Houston.
David Germano, University of Virginia. Andy Fort from TCU.
Mark Dennis, also from TCU.
Willoughby Britton, Brown University.
Jared Lindahl, Brown University.
Carolyn Jacobs, Dean Emeritus, Smith College School for Social Work.
I'm Jake Davis. I've taught at Brown and I'm working at New York University.
Anybody on the other side? Maybe participants who are signed up for this, please identify yourselves and where you are coming from and program that you might be working on.
Paul Humphreys, Loyola Marymount University. We have a nascent consortium of faculty who are interested in contemplative studies. I'm hoping to carry some of the news of this conference back to them. I teach in the music department.
Hello, I'm Yuki Imoto from Keio University in Japan, and currently also based at UC Berkeley Center for Japanese Studies.
I'm Suzanne Klatt. I'm from Miami University of Ohio, and currently I'm teaching some contemplative courses.
I'm Carolyn Kinane. I'm at Plymouth State University in New Hampshire, and we have a contemplative communities program happening there. I'm primarily in an English department as a medievalist.
I'm Don McCown. I'm at Westchester University of Pennsylvania. Let me see. I run the Center for Contemplative Studies there, and I have a minor in Contemplative Studies that I direct.
I'm David Story from Boston College. I teach mainly in philosophy, a little bit in theology. I'm also teaching in a Koru mindfulness program for college students, separate from teaching philosophy. So I'm just looking to learn how folks are, integrating this into their courses.
I'm Erin McCarthy from St. Lawrence University, and I teach in our philosophy department in our Asian Studies program. And we've had a contemplative studies initiative, which we stole from Hal, and with a variety of faculty over the last few years, and I'm hoping we can make it into something more permanent at the institution.
Hi, I'm Anne Vallely, and I'm from the University of Ottawa, where I taught one course last semester on contemplative studies, and the university is interested in perhaps establishing a minor. I'm with the religious studies department, but it would be an interdisciplinary minor. So looking into what I can learn, yeah.
Hi, I'm David Forbes. I'm at Brooklyn College. I teach school counseling. I'm also at the City University of New York Graduate Center Urban Education doctoral program, where they're interested in developing a contemplative program.
I'm Siri Newman, and I'm from Penn State University, and we're working there with a group of interdisciplinary faculty members to start a minor and thinking about exploring a lot of these topics and bringing this to campus, working with some great folks there. So happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm Carol Clements, and I'm currently serving as the Dean of Undergraduate Education at Naropa University and looking at establishing a major and/or minor in contemplative studies. My mind just totally went blank. That's interesting. So, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sharon Parkinson from Vassar College. I actually sit on the Carolyn Grant Endowment Committee, which basically is the major source of funding for experiential and contemplative practices at Vassar. So we are in the process of trying to figure out what our structure should be, whether we should become an initiative. Hopefully we are working towards at least getting a minor concentration going. So that's my focus for being here. Everyone else on the faculty is attending our new president's inauguration. So by default, I get to be here.
Thank you. I'm Carol Bowman. I am something like the Associate Director of the CRAME Study for Contemplative Studies and Mindful Living. I teach in the education program, and I also teach mindfulness meditation and yoga, and we have a yoga teacher training program also.
We have one other person in the back row, and then as I'm doing this, I'd like to ask any of our present undergraduate concentrators. Did I get you? Undergraduate concentrators, just to stand up so that people know who you are and talk to you about what we're doing.
I'm Dan Hirschberg. I'm at the University of Mary Washington, where I teach in the Department of Classics, Philosophy, and Religion, focusing on Buddhism and Asian religions, and direct the minor in contemplative studies.
Hi, I'm Lori Meeks. I'm from the University of Southern California. My area of study is Japanese Buddhism, but I'm just on sabbatical from having been chair of the Religious Studies Department for 3 years, and we just submitted a proposal for a contemplative studies minor, which we're hoping will be approved in the next couple of months. And so we're looking for ideas and hoping that if this is successful, we can build it into a major.
Hi, good morning. I'm Gina. My legal name is Inmi Kim, but I go by Gina. And I used to work with Catherine Carr here, and I'm currently working at Cambridge Health Alliance of Harvard Medical School. And I'm also working on setting up a meditation research center in Korea. So this is the only and the first one in Korea. So I would learn a lot from, Harold.
Is there anybody I've missed? Okay, well, I want to welcome again everybody and thank you all for coming.